It is Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM, and we must welcome back to the program the member for Ripon and an absolute ripper too, must I say. The shadow treasurer Louise Staley joins me on the line. How are you, Louise?
Very well, thank you, Josh. What an introduction. What an introduction.
Oh, well, I nearly used it the first time we spoke. I thought, no, I'll keep it. That's all more of a second date sort of thing.
Ah, right. So you've done it now.
So it's out of the bag. You're going to cop that every time we talk. You are a ripper, and I'll tell you what, you've got a bit to do at the moment. We're watching on from afar with this Andrews government now, and I've got to say, I saw the release today, and I didn't mean to laugh, but I had to. I had no choice, because we're talking about a much-vaunted $135 million regional jobs and infrastructure fund with nothing really announced as to where it's going to be spent and whether or not it's enough or not. I think we're up to our third regional development minister in the last 6 months, and that's no dispersion at all on Mary Ann Thomas, who has made the announcement as the new regional development minister. But this reeks of musical chairs.
I think in relation to Marianne, you're spot on. Marianne is the most recent member into the Andrews cabinet after we've actually had half a dozen ministers go in the past year. Either they've resigned or they've been sacked. So Marianne's in, and they had to give her this one an ag because they haven't really got any more MPs with country seats. So she's got the job, and she's the most newest and junior member, and so she's out today making some announcements, which, to be really blunt, she's really announced this money because the government has, of course, last week they did this 5-day lockdown on no notice. Country Victoria is really, really hurt by tourism being shut down, events, and hospitality. And so what do we see today? They're trying to sort of say, don't look there, don't look at the damage we've done to rural and regional Victoria in the past week and over the past, several months. We'll look here at this new shiny thing. And I just don't think country people are fooled by that. I think they absolutely know that we got into the mess we got into because they couldn't do contact tracing, and they bungled their hotel quarantine. And this is just, please don't think about that. Look over here.
Louise, I spoke with Kate Carnell, who's the Small Business Ombudsman, Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, last week. They put out some statements about any sort of assistance that was coming to the regions needing to be reimbursing regional businesses for everything that they lost during that 5-day lockdown. The most important thing that Kate told us was a couple of $1,000s simply won't be enough. They need to be reimbursed in total so that they survive and thrive, and we can continue having regional businesses at the level we had pre-pandemic. Now we find out that not only has this press release come out some grants for regional jobs and infrastructure, but their most recent announcement before that was for, you guessed it, a couple of $1,000s per business. So in her words, this is simply not enough. I imagine as the Shadow Treasurer, you've had a look at the figures. Do you believe it's enough?
No, I don't. And I think that idea of having restitution for what they've lost is how it should be thought about. Because, of course, what's happening now is over COVID, we had the banks, you didn't have to pay your loans back. There were rental holidays. There were various other waivers of fees and things. Well, they're all back. People have to start paying all of those now. And yet when you have a lockdown, suddenly your income goes away. And if you're a florist, you've just lost a quarter of your income because they shut down on Valentine's Day. So, so these sorts of paltry amounts are not adequate recompense for a 10-hour notice on a lockdown. And I think people are furious about that notice issue. I think, people absolutely support us having the freedoms we generally have compared to a lot of the rest of the world because we're COVID-free and maintaining that. But there's got to be a proportionate response. And locking down rural and regional Victoria when there's no cases is not proportionate.
Louise, can I ask you a couple of questions about bipartisanship? Because Daniel Andrews has whacked the opposition, the Liberals, the Nationals, over the head a couple of times in press conferences for not being as bipartisan as he would like. Now, this announcement by Marianne Thomas was made on your patch today, was it not, in St Arnaud? Is that right?
Yes, it was. It was. They love coming to Ripon. I wonder why that would be.
Well, did you know they were coming?
No, of course not.
So no consultation with you about the package and some of the announcements for St Arnaud? Because to me, if that's the case, that doesn't sound very bipartisan to me.
Well, no. It would be... I just remind you and your listeners of what... the Premier said on the 12th of August 2020, and I happen to keep this quote on my phone, so I'm reminded exactly of what he said. He said, "Whatever the opposition calls for is not relevant to me." So he may say he's calling for bipartisan, he may say he's behaving in a bipartisan way, but that's his view. No matter what I or my colleagues say or do is not relevant to him. Well, that's not bipartisan, and I agree with you. Marianne didn't show me the courtesy of saying she was coming to Ripon to either St Arnaud or Dean, where she was earlier in the day, which is also in Ripon.
That's disappointing. The last thing I'll say, well, Dan won't care about this because he clearly doesn't care about your opinion, but let's ask it anyway. The loss of the AAA credit rating is going to have some significant implications for Victorian businesses, not just in regional areas, but for those in Melbourne as well. Tell us about your understanding as the Shadow Treasurer, why that credit rating has been lost and some of the implications it will have.
So Moody's Investor Services, one of the big credit rating agencies, downgraded Victoria from AAA to AA1. And, I mean, we don't even need my opinion. In fact, let's use their language. They said... reflects Moody's assessment that the state governance has weakened, with policy priorities leading to a very sharp increase in the state's debt burden for a prolonged period, significantly diminishing the state's capacity to respond to future shocks. So Moody's has very clearly looked at our numbers, looked at how much debt we're taking on and what we're taking it on for, and come to the conclusion that we are not the safe bet that we were before, and downgraded us. Standard & Poor's, which is the other big ratings agency, they did the same thing. They downgraded us by 2 notches back in December. So the international markets are saying to investors who buy our debt, you need to tell Victoria they've got to put the price up. You know, they've got to give you more money to hold their debt because they're riskier. Now, in a very low interest rate environment, where we are now, it probably doesn't hurt us too much this year. But the point that Moody's is making is it's like if you've got a mortgage. If you've got a mortgage and interest rates go up, you have to pay more on your mortgage and you've got less left for everything else you've got to spend money on. Well, what Moody's is saying is when interest rates go up, which they will, Victoria is stuck in a position where it's going to have all of this debt interest it's got to pay, and it hasn't got flexibility to then spend it on schools or hospitals or other things. And so they've downgraded us. It's a big deal. I think those of us who are, perhaps over 45 will remember that back in the Kane-Kearney years, we really suffered with our credit rating. It took us a very long time to get that back, and as a result, we paid a lot in interest on the debt. And it's been something I think Victorians have been rightly quite proud of, that we've had a AAA credit rating.
Absolutely.
But we don't we don't have it anymore.
No, and when you look at the level of debt, I mean, in that press release that you're talking about there from Moody's, they talked about in the forward estimates, we're looking somewhere around $145+ billion by 2023-24. Now, as a politician and the shadow treasurer, I mean, should the Liberals and the Nationals, the coalition there, win the next election? I mean, is that a daunting task in any way, shape or form for someone who will be in control of trying to pay that back?
Sure. And one of the problems that we have and that Moody's has identified is that unlike every other state who has a stated plan for when they will start running a surplus again so that they can pay back their debt, Victoria has no such plan. Victoria, in fact, whenever anybody in authority is asked when will we go back to a balanced budget so we can start repaying debt, there is no answer. And so I am very aware as Shadow Treasurer that in coming to government I would be inheriting a lot of debt and not a lot of flexibility. However, I do also think that I'd be inheriting a lot of projects that have a lot of waste in them and a lot of cost overruns, and that's where I'd be looking first. I think that embedded in things like these big Melbourne infrastructure projects like the Metro Tunnel and particularly the suburban rail loop that they're now talking about, that we have no idea how much that's going to cost. There's lots in there that can be fixed before we start having to like that can get us back to surplus is what I'm saying. I think there are ways to do it that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's I guess tough times for everyone at the moment, and a lot of what has fallen at the foot of the Andrews government's feet is not their fault by any way, stretch or form. But look, at the end of the day, you're judged on how you respond to things that pop up in government. And all in all, how would you rate so far the Andrews government's response to the pandemic that's been put at their feet?
Well, I wouldn't be giving them a AAA, I'll give you that. We're the only state where we got a second wave, and the Coase inquiry found that was caused by the failures of the Andrews Labor government's capacity in hotel quarantine. That's completely on their doorstep. When we look at the downgrades in the credit ratings of Victoria, just this week, the major credit ratings agencies reaffirmed Australia's AAA credit rating. So they've had to manage the pandemic. They've had to manage taking on additional debt to deal with the economic effects of the pandemic. And yet the ratings agencies have said they've done that in a prudent and acceptable way, but they're not saying that about us. So clearly this government is not kicking the goals for Victorians that Victorians have every right to expect that their government does. So, no, I certainly wouldn't be rating them very highly.
All right. Well, we'll leave that there today. We will talk again soon, I have no doubt, to the member for Ripon, or Ripon, if you will. Louise Staley, great chatting with you. All the best to you.
Thank you.